It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. My phone buzzed, not with warmth, not with concern, but with a message that felt like a knife through my spine. It was from Grandpa, cold, formal, stripped of any emotion or familial bond. We're done talking. Any further contact goes through my attorney. That was it. No explanation, no signature, just a lifeless command from the man who had once called me his legacy. I sat at my desk, blinking at the screen, trying to feel something. But what do you feel when you've already been hollowed out over years of emotional erosion? Grandpa didn't raise me like a grandson. He raised me like an investment. I wasn't hugged. I was minted. Not loved, shaped. Shaped into the perfect successor for his empire. From the moment I turned 16, I was handed ledgers instead of birthday gifts, stock reports instead of stories. I had become fluent in power dynamics before I even learned to parallel park. And yet, I had followed his path loyally. I streamlined our shipping logistics, digitized our warehouse operations, even secured a deal with a Fortune 100 company. Each win was met not with pride but with a nod, as if I had done nothing more than meet a quota. Still, I stayed. Still, I worked, because somewhere deep down, I thought that maybe someday he'd say, "I'm proud of you." But it all unraveled last week. A discussion, no, an argument, about a $250,000 charitable grant. I suggested it go to a housing fund for disabled veterans. He insisted on a prestige donation to a senator's gala fund. I challenged him, gently, respectfully, but that was enough. His voice got sharp, his eyes colder. "I'm still the name on the building," he had snapped. And now, this message, this quiet exile. I looked out the window as rain streaked the glass. It wasn't just water falling, it was years. Decades of obedience. Sleepless nights. Celebrations skipped. Relationships sacrificed. I realized something in that moment. He had never seen me as family, just as function. And if I was only function, then maybe it was time I performed it. Without him. I remember the early days like they were stamped into my bones. I was just 23 when I gave up the job offer at a top consulting firm to work full-time under Grandpa. Everyone thought I was crazy. "You're turning down 6 figures for a dusty warehouse," they laughed. But I believed in the vision. Or maybe I just believed in him. Back then, it was a struggling trucking company with a dozen aging rigs, poor routing systems, and even worse morale. Grandpa had kept it afloat through brute stubbornness, running it like it was still 1985. But I saw potential, not in the business, but in what it could become. I poured myself into it. 16-hour days, no weekends, no vacations. I wrote the logistics algorithm myself that reduced idle time by 34%, brought in fleet telematics, negotiated new vendor contracts that doubled our margins. Within 3 years, we were statewide. Within 5, national. Every report went through me. Every expansion idea, every pitch deck, every crisis plan. I built it. I had access to every account, every password, every decision-making process. But the official control, that still lay with Grandpa. And I let him have it. Out of respect. Out of belief. Because I thought power wasn't about who signed the checks. It was about who earned them. But owning didn't matter to him. Not really. He rarely praised me. When he did, it came with a smirk or a jab. Not bad for someone who couldn't even mow the lawn straight as a kid. Or Weiss, you're not family. You're staff with a shared last name. I laughed it off, pretended it didn't sting. I told myself it was just his way. But the truth is, I was the one building the castle while he sat on the throne acting like he carved every stone with his own hands. Sometimes he'd introduce me at dinners and fundraisers. "This is my grandson. He's good with computers." Computers, as if I hadn't architected the entire digital backbone of his empire. As if I hadn't taken something small and made it enormous. Not for myself, but for him. For us. But maybe that was my mistake all along. Thinking there was ever in us. The storm didn't start with thunder. It started with a check. $2 million. Wired overnight to a politician whose name was plastered across headlines for all the wrong reasons. Embezzlement. Backdoor land deals. Whispers of extortion. I saw the alert on the company account and thought it was a mistake. An error. But it wasn't. Grandpa had signed off on it personally, bypassing all the usual protocols. I walked into his office, calm but concerned. "We need to talk about the donation," I said, placing the file on his desk. He didn't even look up, just kept sipping his scotch. I pulled reports. I continued. "That senator's being investigated by 2 agencies. He's toxic. The press will crucify us if this gets out. Investors will walk." He glanced up, eyes sharp. "You finished?" I nodded, careful, respectful. "That man helped me 30 years ago," he said. "He made one call and saved my business. I don't care if the world burns him. I owe him." "I get loyalty," I said softly. "But what about protecting everything we've built? We've got employees, families, thousands of people who count on us. You taught me to think bigger." He slammed the glass down. "You don't question me." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. "You work for me," he growled. "You're not a partner. You're not my equal. You're a glorified assistant who got lucky with some spreadsheets." Something broke in me then. Not loud, not visible, just quiet. Quiet and final. I stood still. No words. No anger. Just breath. That evening, I got the text. "Clinical. Legal. Final. We're done talking. Any further contact goes through my attorney." That was all. I sat alone in my office, phone still in my hand, screens glowing with numbers I used to care about. And then I whispered to no one in particular, just the walls that had heard every plan, every dream, every late-night pitch. "Got it." And for the first time in years, I meant it. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry, didn't pace the floor, didn't pour a drink. I just opened my laptop and let my fingers move like they'd been waiting years for this moment. See, Grandpa may have held the title, but I built the skeleton of our empire, the back end, the digital infrastructure, the quiet systems no one else understood. I designed it all with layers of permissions, contingencies, master keys. I told him there were 4 emergencies. What I never told him was that I was the emergency plan. I logged in, bypassing the usual user dashboards and going straight to admin mode, a feature only 2 people on Earth even knew existed. I revoked his access to the company's internal banking suite. The screen didn't blink, didn't ask for a reason. Just a quiet confirmation, access removed. Then I moved to the external card network, the corporate accounts he used for his private flights, his hotel suites, his hush-hush political dinners. Each card had his initials embossed in gold. One by one, I deactivated them. Next, the vendors, security companies, private chefs, landscaping firms billing us for properties I had never even stepped foot in. All of it paused. Payments halted. Reimbursements flagged. Autopay disabled. Within 30 minutes, the man who built an empire on power and control no longer had access to a single cent that didn't pass through me first. And here's the thing, it was all legal. Every document bore my signature as Chief Operations Officer. Every control measure had been approved by the board. I hadn't hacked anything. I didn't break laws. I simply flipped the very switches I had installed. For the good of the company, of course. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen glowing with silence. No alarms, no fireworks, just stillness. For years, I had been the shadow behind the throne. Now, I had moved into the light, and no one even noticed. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. By morning, the empire began to tremble, not with explosions, but with silence. At precisely 8:47 a.m., Grandpa attempted to book his usual Gulfstream to attend a political fundraiser 2 states away. He tapped his preferred charter agent, the one who always greeted him as Mr. Whitaker, sir, and expected the usual confirmation in minutes. Instead, he got a soft but firm reply. "I'm sorry, sir. Your corporate account was declined. Would you like to provide another card?" He didn't panic. Not yet. He called his assistant. "Contact finance. Find out what's wrong." She called. Once. Twice. Then again. No one picked up. Meanwhile, at the country club, Grandpa approached the private lounge ATM to withdraw $3,000 in cash. A habit he maintained weekly, just to feel the weight of his wealth. The screen blinked red. Transaction declined. Please contact your administrator. He stood there, gripping the card, his reflection flickering on the screen. That afternoon, he sent me a short text. There's been a glitch. Let's resolve this quickly. I stayed at it. The same number that had once delivered cold instructions now sent an olive branch, dressed as confusion. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He knew. Behind that message was not concern. It was fear. The kind of fear men feel when they realize the systems they thought they controlled were never truly theirs. He had grown so used to being untouchable that even the smallest inconvenience felt like betrayal. But this wasn't a glitch. It was design. And he knew it. Deep down, he knew that no one else could have done this to him, because no one else had built the fortress he lived in. And now, he was locked outside of it. The empire hadn't collapsed. It had just restructured itself, quietly, efficiently, without him. I moved through the office halls like a ghost with keys to every door. No grand announcement, no press release, no memo about shifting authority, just silence and structure. I kept my head down, stayed in my lane, and let the rhythm of routine do the talking. The logistics team continued their route optimizations. HR processed new hires. The finance department, now streamlined under internal protocols I'd written myself, approved and rejected requests like nothing had changed, except, of course, everything had. The absence of Grandpa was palpable. His thunderous voice, his heavy presence in board meetings, the scent of that cologne he overused, gone. Days passed, and still, no one saw him. No speeches, no walkthroughs, no impromptu shouting fits over minor infractions. By the third day, the whispers began. Is Mr. Whitaker okay? I heard he was hospitalized. No, I think he's traveling. Maybe Europe. Has anyone actually spoken to him? I overheard it all, even the nervous laughter. But I said nothing. Then, one morning by the espresso machine, a junior exec looked at me and asked, hesitantly, "Sir, should we be worried about the future?" I didn't flinch, just looked him in the eye and said calmly, "The company is fine. Focus on the work." He nodded, visibly reassured, and he returned to his desk, like most people do when a machine keeps humming. Because that's what I had built. A machine that no longer needed its founder's name to function. It just needed order, and I gave it that. I didn't gloat. I didn't parade my authority. I just existed. Quietly, constantly, capably. No throne, no crown, no public wall. Just one chair behind a desk. And silence, the kind that doesn't scream revenge. It whispers control. Day 3 brought the sound of desperation, not from Grandpa, but from the man paid to speak on his behalf. The first call came before 9 a.m. I declined it, then another, and another. By noon, there were 5 missed calls from his lawyer, Richard Green, the same attorney who once smirked at me during an estate planning meeting and said, "Well, bloodlines don't always mean succession." He left a voicemail after the 5th attempt. His voice was tight, pressed between legal obligation and personal concern. He's saying he can't even access his medication funds. "Look, I've stayed out of your family dynamics, but this is a serious overreach. It's not just business now, it's health. I'm asking, as a courtesy, please call me back." I sat with it for a while, letting the silence grow around the words. Then I picked up the phone, finally called back. Richard answered on the first ring, his voice already anxious. "Thank you for calling back," he rushed. "This whole thing's gotten." I cut in, calm and measured. He asked that all communication go through his attorney. I'm honoring that request. If he'd like to speak directly, he knows how to reach me. There was a pause, a long one, the kind that carries the weight of realization. Then, softer, "Let's talk, please." That shift, from arrogance to invitation, told me everything I needed to know. They were unraveling, not publicly, not yet, but the foundation had cracked. Grandpa's empire wasn't built on humility or succession planning. It was built on ego, and ego doesn't do well when ignored. I didn't say yes or no. I simply ended the call, because this wasn't about revenge. This was about honoring his request and finally showing him what it feels like to be heard on his terms. The meeting was held in a glass conference room overlooking the city, the same one where Grandpa once held court, surrounded by men who laughed too loudly at his jokes and nodded before he even finished speaking. Now, it was just the two of us. He was already seated when I arrived. No tie, shoulders slumped, eyes tied in a way I'd never seen before. For the first time in my life, he looked small. Not physically, but in presence. Like a monument that had lost its shadow. I didn't sit immediately. I let the silence settle. Let him feel the weight of the room. Finally, he broke it. "You went too far." I smiled faintly and sat across from him. Pulled a thin folder from my bag and placed it on the table. Opened it slowly, methodically, like a surgeon laying out instruments. Inside, timestamps of access logs, financial records, screenshots of email chains he ignored, memos with promises never fulfilled, stock options, executive titles, equity shares, all in his handwriting, all unkept. "You said I was staff," I said calmly. "So I gave you the same respect a staff member would. I clocked in, I clocked out, and I followed orders. Even the one where you told me to stop acting like family." His lips parted like he wanted to argue. But he didn't. He just stared at the papers, the truth laid bare in black and white. "You trained me to be cold," I continued. "To be efficient. To cut feelings out of the equation. Now you're crying about warmth." His hands trembled slightly. He tried to lean forward, assert control. But the weight of history pushed him back. "I built this company," he muttered. "And I rebuilt it," I replied. We sat there, two generations divided not by values, but by how far each of us was willing to go for power. He wanted obedience. I gave him outcome. He raised a soldier, but forgot that even the most loyal soldiers come home with their own weapons. He came for confrontation, but I didn't bring fire, just facts, and silence he couldn't outrun. The silence stretched, thick and bitter. Grandpa stared at the documents on the table like they were foreign relics, like he didn't recognize the empire he once ruled without question. Then he sighed, sat back, and said in a tone that aimed for authority but landed in desperation, "Let's put this behind us. I'll reinstate you as heir. Make it official. The estate, the trust, it'll all come back to you." I let the words sit there for a moment, floating like bait on the surface of murky water. Then I leaned forward, calm and measured. "You can't reinstate someone who built the ladder you're standing on." He blinked. Once, twice, but I didn't stop. "You keep thinking this is about inheritance, about legacy, but you forgot. I wasn't waiting for your approval. I was doing the work, laying the bricks, writing the code, leading the teams. You don't get to dangle a title when I've already outgrown the crown." I slid another set of papers across the table, neatly stamped, legally binding. "As of this morning, I filed full administrative control over the charitable trust. The board approved it, unanimously." His fingers trembled as he reached for the papers, scanning the signatures. The same names that once rallied behind him now stood beside mine. His voice cracked. "You went around me." "No," I said, standing. "I went forward. You just didn't move." I gathered my things, my laptop, my folder, my silence. As I walked toward the door, I paused for one last look around the office. The photos on the wall, the award plaques, the framed news articles, all monuments to his version of the story. But stories change. By the time I stepped into the elevator, the new filings were already being entered into the company's central database. My name, not just on the payroll or the system backend, but on the documents he used to boast about at every dinner party. His legacy wasn't erased. It was rewritten by the one he tried to control, by the one he underestimated. It didn't take long for the ripple to become a tide. Within a week, the board held a private session, without Grandpa. No dramatics, no fiery speeches, just a quiet recognition of what they had already known. The man who built the systems, led the teams, and carried the weight was not the one signing ceremonial letters. It was me. Every member, from the cautious to the calculating, voted to endorse the leadership transition. Not because they feared Grandpa's decline, but because they had witnessed my rise. Late nights at terminals. Emergency calls I answered without hesitation. Strategies that turned losses into growth. They didn't owe me loyalty, they gave it willingly. Clients followed suit. Some sent notes. "We're excited to work under your leadership." Others simply transferred contracts. No questions asked. The language changed. Emails no longer opened with "Mr. Whitaker Sr., but with "Hope you're well, Mr. Whitaker." In less than 2 weeks, Grandpa's title became ceremonial, like an old war medal polished and stored behind glass. His private office sat undisturbed, untouched, his parking space unused. He came in once, just once, walked through the halls like a ghost in his own cathedral. People greeted him, politely, but not like before. No leaning in, no appeasing, just respectful distance. He lingered outside the boardroom where decisions were now made without him, his hand hovering over the knob, then falling away. The final thread snapped when Richard, his longtime attorney, submitted his resignation. A short letter, professionally worded, but between the lines, it read clearly, "I no longer represent what no longer holds authority." And just like that, Grandpa, the man who once commanded rooms, controlled destinies, and carved his name into marble, became a figurehead, a portrait on a wall, a story told in past tense. Power had shifted, not with a bang, not with scandal, just quietly, permanently, not stolen, earned. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the hillside as I walked toward the modest stone marker. It had been years since I'd stood at her grave, not because I didn't care, but because grief had a way of tying knots too tight to undo. My mother, Grandpa's only daughter, the one he had pushed aside when she chose art over accounting, compassion over conquest, the one he never forgave for being soft in a world he believed required steel. I stopped at the edge of the grave, knees slightly bent, and placed a single white rose beside her name. Clean, elegant, unburdened by the noise of apology. There was no speech, just silence. Then, finally, I spoke, not loudly, not bitterly, just enough for the wind to carry it. "He never respected you, but I took back what should have been yours." It wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was restoration. All these years, I thought I was proving myself to him, to Grandpa, working harder, staying loyal, thinking one day he'd see me as more than a tool. But as I stood there, I realized I had been chasing the wrong approval all along. She had believed in people, believed in second chances, believed in me. I had buried that belief under ledgers and legal files, trying to be the man Grandpa demanded, when all I needed was to be the son she would have been proud of. A soft breeze moved through the trees. Not a gust, not a storm, just peace. I closed my eyes, letting it brush past my face, and felt something I hadn't in years. Not anger, not pride, but release. This wasn't about money, or power, or payback. It was about setting things right. And sometimes, setting things right doesn't look like vengeance. It looks like a rose, a name etched in stone, and a man who finally remembered where he came from and who he's choosing to be. 1 year later, I stood behind a glass podium, the city skyline behind me and a room full of eager faces ahead. The Young Entrepreneurs Summit. I hadn't planned to speak. I never liked stages. I preferred war rooms to ballrooms, plans to applause. But they insisted, not because of my title, but because of the story. I looked out at the audience, students, founders, dreamers, the kind of people who believed empires were built with courage and coffee. I smiled gently and began. They'll tell you power is something you earn by pleasing others, that it's granted to you when you behave, when you wait your turn. But I learned something different. Sometimes, power doesn't need to be fought for, just reclaimed. Heads nodded, pens scribbled, cameras flashed. What they didn't see was the quiet transmission playing on a dusty television screen across town, in a sterile nursing home suite where a once mighty man sat alone in a recliner he didn't choose. Grandpa, no more jet setting, no boardrooms, no entourage, just a meal tray, a part-time nurse, and a flickering screen. He watched me speak, the same way he used to watch himself. But now the spotlight had moved. Not stolen, simply redirected. He didn't call. He didn't write. But I knew he watched. The staff said he never missed an interview. Not out of love, out of something harder to admit. Recognition, because deep down, even behind all his pride and silence, he finally saw it. I hadn't taken anything from him. I had simply returned everything to where it belonged. As the summit ended, I stepped off stage, shaking hands, smiling politely, moving through the sea of young faces full of ambition and hope. And somewhere, alone in that dim nursing home, a man who once held every key now held only memory. He taught me control. I taught him consequence.